Hello and welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. The tables are turned as Donald Trump accuses the media of spreading untruths about him.
It's all fake news. It's phony stuff. It didn't happen.
If that's the case, why is BBC News devoting so much airtime to the allegations about the president-elect? Anything Donald Trump says, does or tweets has been intently scrutinised in the build-up to his inauguration next week. So on Wednesday, all eyes were on his first news conference since November's election. And in terms of spectacle, it didn't disappoint. Take the moment when a reporter from CNN tried to ask a question.
Since you're attacking us, can you give us a question? No, Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
Mr. President-elect, since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization
You are attacking our news organization. Can you give us a chance to ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can you state, Mr. President-elect,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically,
she's asking a question.
Mr. President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
You're attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody... No, Mr. President-elect, that's not appropriate.
After that attack on CNN as being a purveyor of fake news, would other correspondents be brave enough to raise their hands? Step forward, Ian Pannell.
Go ahead. You've been waiting. Go ahead.
As far as we understand, the intelligence community...
Stand up, please.
Yeah, Ian Pannell from BBC News. Ian Pannell from BBC News.
BBC News, it's another beauty.
Yeah, thank you.
If there was more than a hint of sarcasm in that description, the president-elect may not have thought the BBC's subsequent coverage of allegations passed on to US intelligence agencies last year was exactly beautiful.
The dossier they were investigating was an open secret. Journalist 2 had been working on it for months. It's a tale of sordid sexual escapade, Russian espionage and multi-million-dollar cash payments allegedly funneled to the Trump campaign. The question for Washington insiders is whether it's fact, part fact or pulp fiction.
It's not currently known whether those rumours are fact or fiction, but we do know the BBC heard last year from multiple sources of the existence of a blackmail tape. So why didn't it broadcast that news then? That was a question bothering Roderick Urquhart. For legal and political reasons, one can see why the BBC did not release the documents suggesting the Russians had collected information on Mr. Trump. But does the suppression of such information in itself inhibit democracy? But others were concerned about the extent to which the BBC was airing the allegations now. Joe Greenhorn put it like this. The BBC is openly admitting that it cannot verify the accuracy of the latest allegations being made against Mr. Trump. In that case, why is it even broadcasting these as news when clearly we cannot confirm if they are true? John Brooks also wondered, why are you reporting gossip for which nobody has any evidence? And Andrew Garrett asked, how does it feel to have the BBC outed as one of the fake news networks on live TV going all over the world? You are now up against a man who is not scared of you. It was the website BuzzFeed which published the 35-page dossier in full on Tuesday evening. Whilst understanding that it was impossible for the BBC to ignore, some viewers felt the corporation wrongly allowed it to dominate their coverage. Brian Watson emailed on Wednesday. I watched all the news conference. The subjects covered were companies transferring US jobs abroad, the appointment of Supreme Court justices, Trump's detaching himself from his companies, Obamacare, and the allegations about personal conduct. The BBC in its key news bulletin at 6 p.m. covered only one of those topics. Why? To focus solely on allegations of misconduct played only to the salacious. Well, the editor of the BBC's News at 6 and News at 10 is Paul Royal, and he's with me now. Paul, it's been a big revelation that the BBC was aware of allegations that a blackmail tape might exist some months ago. Let's start with that. How did the BBC find out about it, and why did the BBC decide not to report on it at all?
Well, the BBC, like other news organisations, became aware of the existence of this dossier and these potential allegations. Obviously, we have robust editorial processes that we go through in terms of verification and trying to substantiate the allegations. We couldn't, they're unproven, and so we weren't publishing them. In the end, as we saw this week, BuzzFeed News decided they were going to publish the 35-page dossier and allegations, and they had their own editorial rationale and case for that.
Given that these allegations are still not verified now, some viewers will be saying, well, should the BBC be reporting on them now either?
Well, clearly what happened overnight on Tuesday became a story, and we were very careful on Wednesday to cover the story that was playing out, but at the same time be quite general and unspecific about the unproven allegations. And we were really, really careful about that. So clearly once some US networks started reporting the story, Donald Trump tweeted about that overnight. There was a story on Wednesday morning that we had to cover, and that was obviously the main part of his news conference that afternoon. But at the same time, we were very, very careful, and actually in one of our broadcasts on the 1 o'clock news, one of the correspondents said, in fairness to Donald Trump, we're not going into detail about the allegations.
If, though, they do turn out to be false, will the BBC be in a difficult position?
I don't think the BBC will be in a difficult position because of the care we took on Wednesday and thereafter to sort of make sure that we weren't effectively recirculating lots of detail about something which at this stage is unproven. So I'm sort of happy that I think we'll be in a good place.
There are, of course, numerous serious allegations now being discussed about President-elect Trump's links to Russia. What's the BBC's policy on how to report them?
We have to stick to our editorial approaches and guidelines in terms of really, really trying to test what is true, what is fact, what can be substantiated, what is worthy of further investigation or analysis and explanation. And so, we have a very sort of tried and tested process for that, built up through years and decades.
And is that partly certain kinds of sources are regarded as trustworthy, having a certain number of them?
Yeah, and as you know, the BBC has 2 sources on stories, and there's been discussions around all of that. And so really, really sticking to our editorial guidelines and processes in what is quite a sort of unique period in terms of covering news.
What about airtime? We heard viewers there saying that there were all these different issues raised in that news conference, and yet the only one that really got any attention was the issue about, the blackmail tape and fake news.
I think that was the main thing in the news conference, but I would totally accept that there were other things that were covered in the news conference as well. In the 6 o'clock news, for example, the main coverage was around the dossier and the allegations, but John Sopel did also talk about the questions around Donald Trump's business interests and what he was doing with those. And obviously across BBC News, on the news channel, on the website, on the radio, other parts of the story and the business side of Donald Trump was covered on the day and beyond as well. Because
it felt, watching that news conference, that this is a very different kind of experience for reporters. It felt like journalists were trying to conduct business as usual, asking questions, and the way he spoke to them, it feels that the BBC is going to have to rethink in a much bigger way how it deals with what the new president says.
Yeah, I mean, I think Donald Trump, for example, could in one tweet appear to change US policy towards China or towards nuclear weapons, and there's no detail. It's not done in a conventional way in terms of a news conference or a policy document, and so that is difficult stuff. And but at the same time, he is president-elect of the United States, and in a week's time will be president. And so we have to treat this stuff seriously, examine it properly, and then decide whether we develop the coverage or not. But to quote Donald Trump, I think for journalists at the moment, this issue is #1 tricky.
Paul Rule, thank you very much.